free market has to do this to fix what the government screwed up. But it's not the free market that you want to blame. Blame the government. So we have to have massive cuts to government spending and maybe big increases in taxes, not on the rich, but on the middle class. On average, Americans are going to have to pay much higher tax. The markets don't understand that, but we're going to have double-digit inflation as a way of life in America. It's just going to continue for year after year after year. And there's really no relief in sight.
Peter Schiff, an expert on the economy, he forecast the financial crisis of 2008.
What was it that you saw that others missed?
You were on my show an awful lot. I appreciate it because you were one of the only people that saw this coming and had the cojones to say it.
Is Peter Schiff right once again, as in 2008? Will inflation lead us into a deep recession? Watch till the end to find out how to prepare yourself for what's coming this time round.
It's just surprising me now looking back. I always knew that the problem was the government had unleashed this massive inflation tsunami. I just didn't know, when it was going to hit. I thought it would have hit sooner, but they did QE1, QE2, QE3. They printed all this money. We had massive budget deficits. We created a mountain of inflation. But nobody cared about the inflation because all they did is look at the CPI and they said, well, it's not going up more than 2%. And part of the reason for that was the way they rigged the numbers. It really was going up more than 2%, but it wasn't going up 10%. Maybe it was going up 4 or 5%, but they could fudge it enough to make it look like it was going up less than 2%. After COVID, right, we just went crazy with the money printing and we sent everybody home and had people not work. I mean, that really brought everything to a head. And so now we're experiencing the consequence of the inflation I've been warning about for more than a decade. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. It's going to get a lot worse. The 8%, 8.5% year-over-year inflation that we've seen is going to go much higher. The Fed is not going to be able to fight inflation. It spent the last 10 years or more creating inflation. And there's no way they're going to get rid of it. Not unless they're willing to allow a much worse financial crisis than the one we had in 2008. Not unless they're willing to allow a far greater recession than the Great Recession we had in 2008, 2009. And in order for us to get rid of inflation, the government is going to have to get rid of the budget deficits because they've been paid for with inflation. So we have to have massive cuts to government spending and maybe big increases in taxes, not on the rich, but on the middle class. On average, Americans are going to have to pay much higher taxes because government has been paid for through inflation. And if we're going to find another way to pay for government other than inflation, well, then it's going to have to be another form of taxation.
Please remember to like and subscribe and hit the notification bell to be notified when we bring out a new video.
And the markets don't understand that, but we're going to have double-digit inflation as a way of life in America. It's just going to continue for year after year after year. And there's really no relief in sight. And then I do think at some point, the bond market's going to collapse. We'll have a sovereign debt crisis and a currency crisis as our creditors realize that the dollar's a bottomless pit. But, in the short run, we had this big sucker rally in the dollar. Maybe it just ended. We're having a big up day. Gold's up, $30, $35 today. Silver's up $1.50. People question the Fed's resolve in fighting inflation now that we saw the Bank of England pivot. And now we're looking at potential bailouts of UBS in Switzerland. And some investors are starting to think, wait a minute, if the British couldn't handle it, if some European banks are going to fail with higher rates, what about American banks? We're not immune to this, and we're not. I mean, if the Fed raises interest rates the way it's claiming, everything is going to implode. And now people are realizing that the Fed may not allow that to happen, and so the dollar is going to implode instead. Free market has to do this to fix what the government screwed up. But it's not the free market that you want to blame. Blame the government. Blame the central banks. They created a problem. The only way to solve it is with the free market. It's the government constantly preventing the free market from solving the problem. That's why the problem is now so big. Federal Reserve never allows any of these recessions to run their course. They never allow the market to really purge the economy of the excesses, get rid of the companies that need to fail so we can make room for those that need to succeed. Instead, the government just bails everybody out, props up companies that should fail, replaces one bubble with a bigger bubble, and the economy never really heals. And so now, I mean, we're going to have, 10 on the Richter scale kind of economic earthquake as a result of these imbalances that have built up because government has stopped it. And what's amazing is that so many so-called experts, in academia, on Wall Street and government, they still don't get it. Like the reason that I knew the 2008 financial crisis was coming is because I understood the mistakes that were made that led to the bubble that made that crisis inevitable. Well, all the people that were laughing at me in 2006, 2007, that had no idea what was about to happen, they're the same guys that are just as clueless today. They don't understand that everything the Fed has done since the 2008 financial crisis was a mistake, as they were, complimenting them. Ben Bernanke was the hero. He was on the cover of magazines. He saved us. He didn't save us. He's the reason that we're in so much trouble. Him and then Janet Yellen and the policies that they pursued instead of pursuing free market, sound money policies. We inflated these giant bubbles. And now we're at the point where we can't do it anymore because now the consequences of the inflation have become a problem. What I would do is I would want to let the markets know that the Federal Reserve was no longer going to be in the price fixing business, that the Federal Reserve was not going to be raising interest rates. The Federal Reserve is going to sit back and let the market raise interest rates to whatever the market believes is the appropriate level. In the meantime, the Fed is going to be divesting itself of its portfolio of U.S. treasuries and mortgage-backed securities. And that would be it. I mean, I would be out of this. I would start shrinking the money supply and let the interest rates go where they need to go. And they would go much, much higher, right? I mean, that's just what would happen. And then everything would implode. But in the long run, I think we should get rid of the Federal Reserve, or at a minimum, go back to the original Federal Reserve that was envisioned when they passed the Federal Reserve Act. In 1913, the Federal Reserve the dollars were still backed 40% by gold. And they were redeemable 100% in gold. I mean, it was real money. It was legitimate currency. It was just issued by the Federal Reserve, but it was still backed by real dollars, gold, that were created by the U.S. Government. They minted the coins, and then all of those Federal Reserve notes, you could take them and, you could get your gold. I mean, that was the whole purpose. I don't think we need a central bank. I think we're better off without a central bank. I think even if you can argue for certain benefits of a central bank, it's not worth the risk. They're always going to exceed their limited mission. Power corrupts, and so you never want to empower a central bank. And I think with the technology we have today of the internet, we never have had less reason for a central bank. There's no reason that we can't go back to a gold standard without a central bank. Banks or private companies, you're into the technology, the internet, the blockchain. It's very easy for banks and other institutions to custody bars of gold and then create digital tokens, right? Tokenize that bar of gold and create currency, right? That is real money because it's backed by that gold, and everybody can negotiate with it. Everybody can use it as a unit of account, medium of exchange. It would be a store of value. We don't need central banks to print these pieces of paper so that we all have something we recognize. We don't need governments. We don't need central banks. We can create our own money, and we can digitize it so that gold will function as a much better medium of exchange and unit of account than it ever has over the past 5,000 years.
Please don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed our content.